My humble respect to Guru Mahan, Guru Piran Sivasangaran, Guru Piran Nyo, fellow Jnanis. Today I'm going to continue Mahan's chapter 24, Vision of God. We covered almost 8 parts to this. Systematically, I went through with you what God realization is, what's the self-realization, how do we experience God. A concept many people find very abstract, the concept of self and God. In the last 8 parts, I went through deciphering this notion of self, and I spoke about the different values of that self. You know, those values close to about almost 64 values that I spoke about, that when one practices this, you get glimpses of that self, you know, about 30, at least in my own journey. I experienced about 30 of that values of that self, you know, in the first door, when the first door opens, and then 14 from the second door, 10 from the third door, and then finally another 10. So all in all, about 64 glimpses of that multi-dimensional, you know, facet of that self. And we saw that self, you know, permeates that God realization state. You know, I spoke about what that God realization, and that when one attains that self, one attains that God realization state. And in the last satsang, I spoke about the human personality. You know, we, through evolution, we have, you know, to some extent, have picked up many different qualities through this evolutionary process. Some have been great, some have crippled our mind, some have made our mind expanded, some have made our mind shrunken. And you see that in the continuum of our own mental personality or mind, we see that we inherit many demonic qualities or negative qualities. You know, and I spoke about how we have a lot of destructive, you know, behavior. There's a lot of envy because there's intensive competition. You know, there's all envy, jealousy. Sometimes our mind, you know, have menacing thoughts, trying to make people's life miserable and difficult. We also have that opulence, you know, that overindulgence, continuously craving for things, and then the negativity. One continuum, the extreme continuum. And then we also had that more godly and divine qualities of graceful thoughts, words, you know, actions. There's a sense of generosity, of time, resources, right? So we see that, and mentoring and supporting people. And there are, you know, those qualities that are embedded in every human mind. We also have that qualities of outstanding, you know, wanting to be the best, giving the best, you know, creating opportunities for others. And finally, this positive developmental, you know, perspective of wanting to develop oneself and also others. In the same way, we see that, you know, the mind is also disciplined. It's not overindulging. It pursues truth, the pursuit of samatva, this pursuit of equanimity. And we see that on one continuum, the divine qualities that the mind has. So an extreme, very negative, and what we call demonic qualities, you know, and the other extreme, we have the divine qualities. So we see that when I spoke about, most of us are somewhere in between there, right? Not the extremes. There are extremes, you know, and most of us are somewhere where the X is, and I spoke about this. And how do we move? And I spoke about introspection, contemplation, reflection, and meditation. And slowly, slowly, we start getting the supreme experiences. In my context, I spoke about the 30 enlightening experiences, about 14 of them. I'm sure some of you all would have experienced, liberating experiences and finality experience. All in all, for me, about 64, and it's growing. And, so the self is infinite possibilities and potentialities. And I'm slowly discovering as my journey continues. In spite of being more than 40 years of doing this, I'm still discovering new things of that self. And we see that, that self gives us this experience of that infinite potential and possibilities. And it also leads us to that divine qualities that I spoke about. So these 64 qualities maps into what I call the divine qualities. Glimpses of the self starts moderating and modulating the way we think, the way we create opportunities for others, and the developmental nature, which is continuously we're expanding. So I spoke about this, in the last satsang. I want to go a little bit more to give you a little bit more insights into the mindset, why sometimes we can't cognize the divinity in its entirety. We get a limited, understanding, and it's tied to our own personality. And you see that most human beings, from the time they are in the mother's womb, they're continuously responding to the stimulation, the stimuli. When the mother walks, it's getting a sense of the material world. And when the child is born, the full bombardment of the material world. And that continues throughout one's life. And it's only natural that the human mind, the human personality takes a material personality, because it's all fully bombarded by the material personality, though it is a spiritual personality. So the mind, the software of life, responds to the material world and picks up, learns, relearns, unlearns everything from the material world. Even when the child is at a very, very, age of 1, 2, you see that the stimulation, enables the mind to grow. And we see that through preschool, we reinforce that about the material world, primary school, secondary school, and as we evolve, everything is about the material world, right? And even when we go to university, everything is about the material world. And very few people get the full understanding of the material world. Even in universities, the whole university should be teaching us about universality. But unfortunately, most of the university education only teaches us part of the universe, which is primarily the material universe. So we see that this material personality is wedded and welded to our mind. And that leads to, so we cognize the world with that mental lens. And if the mental lens is using a material personality or material identity, which is limited, which is mortal, and so on, we see the experiences of life, becomes limited, right? And we see that, that's what we experience, because our lens is tied to the material personality, which is object-driven, which has its own finitude and which has its own limitedness. It sustains for a while, and then the lifespan is short. So we see that everything sustains for a while, and then dissolves. So that trinity of, birth, existence, and dissolution is imprinted in that mind. So to some extent, you see that the mind picks up that limitedness personality. things that you can't do, things that you can't cognize. The bandwidth is not there to go deeper. And many things becomes impossible. You try and then people give up, right? I've also seen in meditation, people start off really well, then they give all the excuses of not to do it, right? Many things starts off and then it fizzles out very, very quickly. So they say impossible, Guru, or they'll give you all kinds of excuses that, I'm busy or things like that. So this is human nature, right? So the sustaining power is not there. So many things becomes impossible for many people. And the third aspect of the life imprint, because there is that the mind is imprinted with the limitedness and that unable to the sustaining power, many things that they wish they could do, many things that they, have great aspirations, ends up in failure, right? They fail and they say, oh, I'm not successful, and they give up easily. Even in meditation, I see this, right? So there's no that patience, perseverance, and persistence and the practice, right? So most people have experienced that failures in life. They want to achieve great things, but unable to do it. And when that comes in, you see that when they see others excelling, others doing really well, there's a sense of envy comes in, right? Whether it's oneself or one's own children, you see other people's children doing really well, there's a sense of envy. And that leads to a life experiences that is limited, unable to achieve a lot of failures and envy, and it's not a comfortable place. The mind is not a comfortable place, right? You see, there's a beautiful verse that, what is Vedanta? Vedanta is to know this knowledge of that self. But because the mind is wedded and welded to the material world, the mind has a limited experiences. So the notion of Vedanta means that it's an abode that don't have that uncomfortable feeling. What does that mean? It means that, when you are in a house, a small hut, the ventilation is not so good. You can't get the breeze. You're sweating and the feeling of mugginess and uncomfortableness. You feel restless. You can't sleep, nor can you. So it's the uneasiness. This is what happens to most human mind that is anchored on that material personality, that this uncomfortable uneasiness. And a beautiful saying in Tamil, Vedanta Mavadu Vetre Urinda Yeram. That means Vedanta, this bliss, the knowledge of that self is the abode that is, don't have this uncomfortable, limited, unable to do, or the impossible, failures, continuous failures. It's okay to fail, but to pick up and learn from it, that value chain is not there. Unable to do that, unable to learn to transform failures into, foundation for learning. And because they can't do it and they see others doing it really well, they get upset, and so on. And this is what an ordinary human beings, and we see this in, among the people that we are with. You see that in the scriptures, of, characters that have these qualities, these humanly limited qualities. And we see that because of that, they're unable to achieve its full potential, they're unable to cognize God in its entirety. The divinity that is embedded in them with fullness, wholesomeness. There's always this search for that full wholesomeness because it's not accomplished. So we see that, Mahants and other great saints and great prophets and various scriptures actually allude to transcending this material personality into something far greater. But what happens is that because it's so caught up with this material identity, you see that they're unable to break away, and that limitedness is reinforced, right? So the limitedness is reinforced, and we see that the mind becomes more and more material, even trying to capture the divinity in a very material way. We see that reinforcement takes place, and you see that there comes a stage where the mind is so entrenched with that material identity, all the weaknesses completely cripples the mind. And after a while, they give up. Many become depressed. Many just give up on life. Right? So everything starts crumbling, right? Their relationships, their aspirations, and many, after a while, just give up. So Mahan's another great say, so they keep searching, but they are searching somewhere external. But Mahan's another great saints, says, hey, you're looking at the wrong place, right? Don't objectify everything. You are not the object. The mind is much more subtle than this. The search is not outside. The search is within. And this is where the search of discovering that self, who am I? What am I? What am I made of? And this is a subject-driven endeavor. This is what all the yoga start teaching you, the union of the mind, to that self-personality that is the driver of that body, the driver of all our experiences. And this is what in the last 8 classes that I spoke about, that when we are anchored on the material personality, we would not be able to cognize the divinity or God or the self in its entirety. So and I spoke about how in everything that we do, introspection, contemplation, reflection, and meditation, I want you to remember that word ICRM. That is what takes us to a much deeper understanding of who we are. And we see that leads to different types of life experiences. Our life becomes very, very different, right? Our life becomes, we understand who we are, and we don't get caught up by things. As I said, the 64 values that I spoke about that gives you that multi-dimensional perspective of that self that emanates, that everything it touches, you experience the glimpses of that self. And you piece all the glimpses and you get a bigger picture of it. And you understand that you are not that limited mind. You are that which has got the supreme experiences. You've got that, expanded consciousness, the liberating qualities, the finality. And you see, life becomes liberating. You live to outlive everything. You learn to divinize every desires. No stone is unturned. You understand it and you outlive it. In that process, the mind is using its buddhi, its jnana, it start become more and more innovative, right? Okay, this did not work. Okay, there's a failure here. No problem. I'm going to learn from the failure to try something different, right? It becomes an explorer. It keeps testing and trying so that life becomes, as I said, the explorer in us emerges and we become very innovative, right? That's what innovators are. So you become an innovator of your own life. But the other beautiful part of life, I'm just talking about the life experiences that we get, right? So when we become innovative or creative, something very interesting happens. That self is very subtle. It's not like the gross body, right? The body has the grossness, you have, your muscles and you have things that you can do in an active way. But when the mind is anchored on the self, or the mind, the DNA of the self is infused in that mind, we see that The mind acquires the subtleties of that self, the full infinite potential and possibilities, and the performance becomes much more intensive, much more deeper, and much more wider. So you get that finesse, that subtleties of the performance, things which you did not pick up with a gross mind, a mind that is caught up with the material. Now you pick up subtle things. You pick up subtle flows of energy. You pick up subtle knowledge and understanding. You can piece things together. What may look gross, but you see that it's connected to a much more deeper substratum. So the subtleties of understanding of life improves our performance of, how we engage the world. A sense of skillfulness, this notion of finesse is we become skillful. Not surprising, because we become more innovative. We test different things, doesn't work, we try some. In that process, we learn new things. Our memory starts becoming a knowledge treasure. We become really skillful in how we manage our life. Yes, okay, we have some challenges here. Let's find ways to navigate this through, right? And one of the most complex things of human beings is that the human interactions. Most people have a lot of challenges because of challenges with human interactions, whether it's with their family, friends, people, and so on. So you see that the lack of finesse, they don't know what to say when, how to say it in a diplomatic way. So you see that part of the finesse is that having the diplomacy of handling different and difficult situations. Yes, we all come through different challenges, but how we manage that situation is really important. So you want to see how good your life experiences are, find out how diplomatic you are in handling this difficult situation, diplomatic in handling difficult people. That's part of God realization, that finesse. So life becomes, so you pick up those skillful things, the subtle things that ordinary human beings would not pick up, including human feelings, sensitivities, including that of nature. And that's what makes life experience really exciting. And the last one is actually about excellence, right? You see excellence everywhere. And this is the beauty of this self. And I spoke about this. All the different facets of self makes your mind more refined and pursue excellence, not compromising on, the quality. The quality of our life depends very much on the quality of the human mind, and the quality of the human mind depends on where it's anchored. If the mind is anchored on that self with all the glorious values and virtues, you see that the mind will thrive beautifully. So you have liberation, you become innovative, you have the finesse to manage every situation, every circumstances, every person, right? And you permeate equality, a personality of excellence, the Sarvadakshina that is spoke about by the great saints. So this is how life turns out, right? So it depends on what you anchor yourself on, right? So this is what Mahan says, to cognize the divinity, he says, Unarva Gavani. He says, focus your mind on that self, that big I. In the scriptures, he says about the Brahman. In other scriptures, he speaks about the Holy Spirit, right? So when that happens, so when we reinforce that, we understand the life experiences and cognize it and reinforce, you see that we reinforce that self-values back again. We understand the self better, right? We're not caught up by the Sukha Dukkha, birth, death cycle, We become creative in trying to understand what that self is, to pick up the subtleties and pursue that excellence, to search for truth. And you see, that reinforces, all this is happening in the human mind, nowhere else. So the human mind becomes polished and polished and polished, somewhat like a diamond. If you see the diamond, the original state, there's so much, it looks really like a charcoal. And through knocking and taking off that soot, polishing and grinding and grinding and grinding, the mind goes through so much reformation. And when it's presented to the world in the jewelry shop, it looks, poof, and it's got the value. This is what happens to the human mind. Continuous, relentless patience, perseverance, persistence, practice, 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 testing out, research, asking questions, probing, and you see that the human mind goes through that transformation. It reinforces that values, right? And that's what makes this journey really exciting. And yes, you have a problem. Okay, let's look at it. But the mind is able to, absorb that problem, subsume it, interrogate it, go through it in detail, find out why it's here, how it's there, what learnings I did, and then immediately it's absorbed, dissolved, it becomes a combustion for our enlightenment and illumination. It's chalked in our memory. The next time it appears, we know what to do, not to get worried. The next one, and the next one, and the next one, ultimately you see that you come to a stage, hey, there is no situation that you cannot manage. That is what the source of that enlightening life experiences. That same thing, that self-discovery is what the life experience that reinforces leads us to that godly divine life. The life of, as we refine ourselves, as we continuously, relentlessly push, grinding and learning and introspecting and contemplating, and reflecting, and meditating deeply and researching, we see that slowly, slowly our thoughts become more and more refined, more and more graceful, and our words become more gentler. Our actions become more lofty and inspirational, and that is what the divine quality starts imprinting on us. After all, the value of any human being is the quality of the human mind. A weak person could be strong through this process. A person that lacks the courage will become very courageous. And we saw that in the Bhagavad Gita, where Arjuna was completely, broken. But through the process of his guru, the 18 chapters that transforms the mind to become divine and godly. The outstanding qualities, you are able to create so much opportunity for yourself. I talked about the 10 capitals, from spiritual capital to, mental capital, physical capital. The opportunity is enormous. The whole universe is just opened up because the mind has opened up to that universal self. That's what happens, and you won't become poor at all. People are poor because of poverty of intellect, right? If you have an intellect, you can put yourself in a desert where there's nothing, barren land, you still can create value. And this is what the power of the human mind is. And you continuously developmental, continuously progressing, pushing the boundary of knowledge, right? As I said to you, I've only discovered 64 dimensions of that self and continuously discovering new. There is infinite description of that self. I've only, in the 40 over years, only discovered about 60 over. But it's had a major transformation in my life, and I know that I will continue to add to that list until my body drops off, right? So that's what makes the life really exciting, right? And that quality reinforces. You never stop learning. The best guru is the best student, right? the best scientist is the best explorer that never stops learning, right? So when you have so much time devoted to this kind of discourse, you don't have any more time for other, trivial thoughts, trivial things. So you crowd out all this negativity, the drunkenness, and you see that the mind continuously grows. The human personality, if it's anchored on the body can only grow so much up to the age of 21. After that, it's all decline. So if the mind is anchored on that, the mind is going to be limited. But what is in us that can expand continuously like the universe? It's that DNA, the divine nectar of awareness, our consciousness, ourself, that is continuously in the state of expansion. And if the mind is anchored on that, we see that, the mind is continuously expanding and growing. It crowds out all the drunkenness and negativity. And we start cognizing this divinity. And this is what Mahan tells us, that seeking, still seeking, the seeker finds himself the God. So this full trust of God is not an abstract concept. It's not something theoretical. You get glimpses of it, and when you piece it together, you see that that cycle of life is actually, this microcosm called life is actually part and parcel of the macrocosm of that divinity that is thread beautifully, to the fabric of our life. Our fabric of our life is interconnected and interwoven to that universal peace sanctuary that Mahan speaks about. And when the mind touches that, the mind, it's like a what do you call it? The bead that is strung in a thread, and you see that your life may be a seed or a bead, but if you remain at the bead, you're only the bead. But the moment the bead realizes that it's interwoven by the thread, it sees all the beads as interconnected. So in the same way, when the mind is caught up with the material personality, it takes a limitedness. But when the mind touches the thread that is connecting everything, the mind gets the cognition that I am also the thread that interconnects everything. At that moment, one realizes that actually, my identity is both the bead and the thread and all the beads that are there. So this is what Mahan's teachings are about, to cognize the divinity of God. Why people are unable to cognize it? Because they're caught up with this limited personality and unable to sustain it. And we see that when the mind transitions to the self-personality, the mind is able to cognize that divinity and sustain it in every facet of our lives. And this is what the vision of God is, that as long as the mind is anchored on that material personality and identity, the mind will have difficulty, understanding the power of the divinity that is imprinted in us. So introspect, contemplate, reflect, and meditate deeply. Use the mind as a laboratory for exploration. And when that exploration, as you continuously develop yourself, you see that what you are unable to cognize becomes very clear. What you're unable to sustain now becomes sustainable. And life becomes an awesome, inspirational journey of continuous learning. And God is not far away from all of us, right? You'd get that infinite divinity. And you realize something very interesting. If God is infinite, where is the closest distance God is? And you'll see that that divinity is part and parcel of our personality, interwoven in every life that is, creation has created. So the creator is part of that creation. And when we go deeper, we understand not only the creation, the body, but we also understand the creator that gave rise to the body and all the experiences. And God is not far away from us. So everything that we see, everything that we cognize is that the vision of the divinity. And life itself is divine. That's what in some of the scriptures it's written that I am this, I am that, I am everything. That's what Swamiji says, Niena, Nanini, Niyum, Nanum, Nani, that I am embedded in everything. So I and you are the same. And this is what Swamiji's teachings are. Sandosham.